Differences in dopamine signals in patients with history of alcohol use disorder. Differences in dopamine signals in patients with history of alcohol use disorder. You're listening to Technical News Reading, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium. This edition's reading focus comes to us from Neuroscience News. It's titled Differences in Dopamine Signals in Patients with History of Alcohol Use Disorder. It was published under the categories of Neuroscience and Psychology on February 7th, 2023. Summary. The connection between dopamine and counterfactual information, or notions of relief and regret, is altered in those with alcohol use disorder. Source: Wake Forest University. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's made in the brain and acts as a chemical messenger, communicating between nerve cells in the brain and the rest of the body. Dopamine can impact how people think and feel. While it's most often associated with being a feel-good hormone, its role in functions such as movement, cognition, and learning is an area of current research. Researchers are also working to better understand the impact that substance abuse or addiction disorders have on dopamine levels and behavior. In a new study from Wake Forest University School of Medicine, scientists have demonstrated that the connection between dopamine and counterfactual information, which is related to the psychological notions of regret and relief, appears altered by alcohol use disorder. The findings appear in the February issue of the Journal of Neurosurgery. Kenneth T. Kishida, Ph.D., Associate Professor of Physiology and Pharmacology and Neurosurgery at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, studies neurotransmitters and their role in human behavior and decision-making. Using fast scan cyclic voltammetry, an electrochemical technique, Kishida's team can detect and measure serotonin and dopamine in real time. Taking these measurements is very challenging and can only be done during invasive procedures such as deep brain stimulation, DBS, brain surgery, which is commonly used to treat conditions such as epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. For this study, Kishida's team collaborated with neurosurgeons Stephen B. Tatter, MD, and Adrian W. Laxton, MD, to insert a carbon fiber microelectrode deep into the brain of 4 patients at Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center who were scheduled to receive DBS to treat their movement disorders. 2 of the participants had a history of alcohol use disorder, and 2 did not. While the participants were awake in the operating room, they played a simple computer game. As they played the game, dopamine measurements were taken in the striatum, the part of the brain that controls cognition, reward, and coordinated movements. We measured dopamine once every 100 milliseconds during a sequence of fairly simple decisions, Kishida said. The game involved a series of choices between sure bets or 50% chance gambles for small amounts of money. Each task involved one simple decision. On one side of the screen, the patient saw one number, a sure bet. If the study participant selected the sure bet, they would win that amount. On the other side of the screen, the participant saw 2 numbers, which were separated by a line. This was the gamble outcome, and the participant would win either of the 2 numbers with an equal 50% chance. Sometimes taking the gamble was technically the better outcome, but sometimes it wasn't, Kishida said. We were able to assess how participants made choices and what dopamine was doing as they did so. The research team found distinct differences in how the brain releases dopamine based on participants' alcohol use disorder history. Dopamine levels in participants with alcohol use disorder following game outcomes associated with relief were lower in patients without, or lower than in patients without alcohol use disorder. We've shown before that dopamine levels in humans seem to track information related to regret and relief, Kishida said. Previous research suggests that learning from regret is impaired in patients with alcohol use disorder. In our study, dopamine measurements at these really fast timescales appear altered in patients with a history of alcohol use disorder. When their choice was the best it could have been, we see dopamine levels falling when we had expected it to increase, like we observed in patients without alcohol use disorder, Kishida said. Kishida acknowledged that a major limitation of the study is the limited sample size. Much more work is needed, Kishida said. However, to my knowledge, these represent the first investigations of dopamine signals on sub-second timescales in humans with alcohol use disorder. Kishida said larger studies are needed to gain more insight on these fast chemical fluctuations in the human brain, what they mean for decision-making processes, and whether they are altered in humans with addiction disorders. About this dopamine and alcohol use disorder research news. Author, press office, source Wake Forest University, which is who you'll contact. Original research is under closed access and is from a paper titled Intracranial Sub-Second Dopamine Measurements During a Sure Bet or Gamble Decision-Making Task in Patients with Alcohol Use Disorder Suggest Diminished Dopaminergic Signals About Relief by Brittany Liebenow and others in Neurosurgical Focus. You've been listening to Technical News Reading presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium. Neuroscience News continues with an abstract from the paper titled Intracranial Sub-Second Dopamine Measurements During a Sure Bet or Gamble Decision-Making Task in Patients with Alcohol Use Disorder Suggest Diminished Dopaminergic Signals About Relief. Objective. To the author's knowledge, no data have been reported on dopamine fluctuations on sub-second timescales in humans with alcohol use disorder, AUD. In this study, dopamine release was monitored in 2 patients with and 2 without a history of AUD during a Sure Bet or Gamble SBORG decision-making task to begin to characterize how sub-second dopamine responses to counterfactual information related to psychological notions of regret and relief in AUD may be altered. Methods. Measurements of extracellular dopamine levels were made once every 100 microseconds using human voltammetric methods. Measurements were made in the caudate during deep brain stimulation, electrode implantation surgeries for treatment of movement disorders in patients who did or did not have a history of alcohol use disorder. Participants performed an SBORG decision-making task in which they made choices between sure bets and 50% chance monetary gamble outcomes. Results. Fast changes were found in dopamine levels that appeared to be modulated by what could have been and by patients' AUD status. Positive counterfactual prediction errors related to relief differentiated patients with versus without a history of AUD. Conclusions. Dopaminergic encoding of counterfactual information appears to differ between patients with and without AUD. The current study has a major limitation of a limited sample size, but these data provide a rare insight into dopaminergic physiology during real-time decision-making in humans with an addiction disorder. The authors hope future work will expand the sample size and determine the generalizability of the current results. NeuroscienceNews.com asks that you join our newsletter. Sign up to receive our recent neuroscience headlines and summaries sent to your email once a day, totally free. We hate spam and only use your email to contact you about newsletters. You can cancel your subscription anytime. Neuroscience News posts science research news from labs, universities, hospitals, and news departments around the world. Science articles can cover neuroscience, psychology, AI, robotics, neurology, brain cancer, mental health, machine learning, autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, brain research, depression, and other topics related to cognitive sciences. You've been listening to Technical News Reading, presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium. This edition's reading focus comes to us from neurosciencenews.com. You can read this article and others like it for yourself by visiting neurosciencenews.com. That's neurosciencenews.com. neurosciencenews.com. Differences in dopamine signals in patients with history of alcohol use disorder.